The grand auction hall hummed with low chatter and disinterest. A single spotlight illuminated a motionless horse lying in the center of the ring. This chestnut stallion's coat was a map of scars, each one a silent testament to hardship and neglect. The auctioneer's voice cut through the air, desperate to spark any interest. "Who will start the bidding?" But the crowd remained cold and unmoved. A ripple of laughter spread and a voice muttered, "What's the point?" The whispers grew, laced with scorn. "It looks like it's given up on life," remarked a woman in a designer dress, her tone thick with disdain. Others nodded, their judgments sharp and final. The horse's eyes appeared dull, its spirit seemingly crushed by years of suffering. In that glittering hall of polished spectators, this scarred creature was a spectacle of rejection, worthy of no one's second thought. Then something unexpected happened. From the back of the room, a chair scraped loudly against the floor, cutting through the cruel remarks. A young man, dressed plainly and looking out of place, stood up. His voice was steady and clear. His words sliced through the air, heads turned in disbelief. "Him," a man sneered. The young man ignored the chuckles and shaking heads. His eyes were fixed only on the horse, and something in his expression quieted even the harshest critics. The room fell into an uneasy silence as he approached the ring. After completing the payment, the young man walked up to the fallen animal. He crouched down to meet its gaze. The horse flinched but did not turn away. Leaning closer, the boy whispered something soft, words meant for no one else to hear. To everyone's shock, the horse's ears twitched. For the first time that night, it lifted its head. The crowd exchanged bewildered glances. Someone murmured. The days that followed were astonishing. News spread quickly about the once-forgotten horse, now thriving under the care of its unlikely new owner. The transformation was undeniable. The stallion, once deemed utterly useless, began to display remarkable strength and intelligence. Its gait grew proud, its eyes alive with purpose. People who had mocked the young man at the auction began to wonder if they had been blind to something extraordinary. But what had the young man done to ignite such a profound change? And why did the bond between them feel so unshakable, as if their paths were destined to cross? The answers were about to unfold in ways no one could have predicted. The morning sun bathed a small, modest stable in a warm glow. The young man, named Ethan, stood silently watching the horse he had named Phoenix, inspired by the mythical creature's ability to rise from ashes. Phoenix stood stiffly in a corner, muscles taut, movements cautious. His scars, both visible and hidden, had built a fortress around his trust. Ethan knew he had taken on an uphill battle, but a deep instinct told him this horse was worth every effort. Ethan spent hours sitting outside Phoenix's stall, reading softly or simply sharing the space. He never forced interaction, understanding that trust could not be rushed. One quiet afternoon, as Ethan sat with his back against the wooden panels, Phoenix took a hesitant step toward him. The sound of hooves on straw made Ethan glance over his shoulder, his heart leaping. Phoenix's ears twitched nervously, but for the first time he seemed curious rather than fearful. The breakthrough, however, did not come without challenges. The next morning, Ethan decided it was time to lead Phoenix out to the pasture. The moment the bridle touched his head, Phoenix reared up with a panicked whinny that echoed across the field. Ethan quickly let go, his hands trembling, but he did not yell or scold. Instead, he stepped back, giving Phoenix space, and murmured soothing words. It was clear the scars ran deeper than physical pain. They were rooted in betrayal. As days turned into weeks, a pattern emerged. Ethan would try, fail, and try again, each time making the slightest progress. He began to piece together fragments of Phoenix's story from his reactions. The way Phoenix flinched at sudden movements or froze at the sound of raised voices hinted at a past filled with cruelty. Ethan felt anger bubble inside him at the thought of what Phoenix must have endured, but he made a silent vow to replace every bad memory with one of kindness and patience. One evening, as the sky blazed with orange and purple, Ethan tried something new. He brought out a brush, moving slowly as he approached. At first, Phoenix stiffened, muscles coiled as if ready to flee. But Ethan's touch was gentle, his strokes rhythmic and reassuring. Slowly, Phoenix's rigid stance softened. His head dipped slightly and a soft exhale escaped his nostrils. For the first time, he relaxed under human hands. It was a small victory, but to Ethan, it felt monumental. Unbeknownst to Ethan, Phoenix's transformation was stirring whispers in the town. Those who had mocked him at the auction were starting to notice. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all were watching to see how far this unlikely partnership could go. As Ethan stood beside Phoenix that evening, brushing his coat under the fading light, he felt a flicker of hope. Yet deep down he sensed this was only the beginning. Something bigger was on the horizon. The days blended together as Ethan and Phoenix settled into their routine. Each morning, Ethan rose before dawn, his boots crunching on the gravel path to the stable. Phoenix had grown accustomed to his presence, nickering softly when Ethan appeared, though his eyes still held a guarded skepticism. It was progress, but Ethan knew the road ahead remained long. He cherished the small victories. Every glance of trust, every step taken closer. One afternoon, Ethan led Phoenix to the open pasture, the rolling fields glowing under golden sunlight. Phoenix hesitated, hooves planted firmly as if afraid. Ethan didn't pull or push. He simply stood beside him, allowing the horse to take his time. Finally, with a cautious step, Phoenix moved forward. The sight made Ethan's chest tighten. It was as if Phoenix was learning to reclaim the freedom he had lost. But the serenity shattered when a loud, sudden crack echoed through the field. Startled, Phoenix bolted, eyes wide with panic. Ethan's heart sank as he sprinted after him, shouting his name. Phoenix galloped wildly, dodging invisible dangers, the past rushing back as if he were running from ghosts. Ethan finally caught up to him near the pasture's edge, breath labored. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice steady despite his pounding heart. That evening, as Ethan sat exhausted outside the stable, an older man approached. It was Mr. Grayson, a retired rancher who had been quietly observing. "You've got a good heart, son," he said, his voice gravelly with age. Ethan looked up, confused. Mr. Grayson continued, "That horse has seen things, endured things you can't imagine." The words lingered long after Mr. Grayson had left. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. Questions swirled. What had Phoenix endured? Who had hurt him so deeply? Why had no one cared enough to stop it? Determined, Ethan made a decision. He would uncover Phoenix's past, no matter the cost. The horse deserved more than a new life. He deserved closure. As dawn broke, Ethan stood at the stable door, watching Phoenix with newfound resolve. The stallion looked back, his eyes calmer, as if sensing Ethan's determination. The journey to uncover the truth would not be easy, but Ethan was ready. Little did he know, the truth would challenge not only his understanding of Phoenix, but also his own beliefs about trust, forgiveness, and redemption. Ethan's search began at the auction house. The manager, a stout man with a gruff demeanor, barely looked up from his paperwork. "That horse, you're better off forgetting about him," he muttered dismissively. But Ethan was persistent, his voice firm. "I need to know where he came from." After reluctance, the manager sighed and pulled out an old, dusty file. "This is all I've got." The file was thin, containing only a brief description and the name of the previous owner, Victor Harland. Ethan's heart sank at the lack of detail, but the name was a start. Harland's address was scribbled in the margins, a ranch on the outskirts of town. Thanking the manager, Ethan left, clutching the file tightly. A sense of unease crept over him. What kind of person had left Phoenix in such a broken state? The drive to Harland's ranch was long. When Ethan arrived, he was met with a scene that mirrored his worst fears. The property was run down, fences sagging, barn doors hanging loosely. As he approached the house, an older man stepped onto the porch, his face weathered, eyes sharp but devoid of warmth. Harland barked, irritation lacing his tone. Ethan swallowed hard and explained why he was there. But as Ethan pressed, his persistence chipped away at the man's defenses. Harland's facade cracked. He admitted Phoenix had been part of a string of horses used for grueling work, pushed beyond their limits with no regard for their well-being. He wasn't strong enough, Harland said bluntly, as if it excused his actions. Ethan clenched his fists, anger simmering, but forced himself to remain calm. Harland hesitated, his gaze faltering. "I guess I thought maybe someone would see something in him," he muttered, almost as if ashamed. Ethan left the ranch with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: Phoenix had endured more than he had imagined. The weight of the past felt heavier now, but it also fueled his resolve to make things right. That evening back at the stable, Ethan sat beside Phoenix, running a hand gently along the stallion's mane. "I know where you came from," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Phoenix turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting Ethan's. For the first time there was a flicker of trust, a silent understanding. The bond was growing stronger, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling this journey was far from over. The past had been uncovered, but it still cast a long shadow over their future. The truth about Phoenix's past weighed heavily on Ethan. The image of Harland's cold indifference and the conditions Phoenix had endured replayed in his mind like a haunting memory. He spent hours sitting by the stall, sharing the silence. "You've been through hell," he murmured one evening, stroking Phoenix's scarred neck. Phoenix blinked slowly, his ears twitching as if he understood. For Ethan, that small reaction was a glimmer of hope. The next day, Ethan led Phoenix to the open pasture, carrying only a halter and a lead rope. There was no pressure, only patience. Phoenix hesitated, hooves rooted in place, but Ethan stood beside him, giving him space to decide. After a long moment, Phoenix took a step forward, then another, until they stood together in the middle of the field. Ethan couldn't help but smile. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As Ethan continued working with Phoenix, word of their bond spread through town. People began stopping by the stable, curious about the story of the auction reject and the determined young man. Some came to offer support, while others doubted Ethan's efforts, their skepticism thinly veiled behind polite smiles. Among them was Claire, a local veterinarian. "You're doing something incredible," she told Ethan, her voice warm and sincere. "But he's going to need more than patience." Claire's words struck a chord. She offered to examine Phoenix and help develop a recovery plan. Ethan agreed, grateful for her expertise. As Claire worked, she pointed out areas where Phoenix still carried tension, the physical remnants of his trauma. "This won't be easy," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "But he has the will to fight." Ethan nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. With Claire's guidance, he began incorporating gentle exercises and stretches into Phoenix's routine. One evening, as Ethan brushed Phoenix under the soft glow of barn lights, he noticed something new. The stallion leaned into the brush, eyes half closed in contentment. Ethan paused, his heart swelling. For a moment, it felt as though Phoenix had finally let go of some of the weight he carried. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was a start, a sign that trust and healing were possible. But just as Ethan began to feel hopeful, a knock on the barn door shattered the quiet night. He turned to see a tall figure silhouetted against the moonlight. The man stepped inside, boots crunching on straw. "You must be Ethan," he said, his voice low and steady. Ethan froze, his grip tightening on the brush. He asked, his tone guarded. The man took a step closer, his expression unreadable. His presence filled the barn with an uneasy tension. His sharp eyes swept over Phoenix before locking onto Ethan. "Name's Carter. I used to work with Victor Harland. That horse isn't just any stallion. He was part of a training program for competitive endurance." Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He asked, keeping his tone firm despite the rising unease. Carter's expression softened, but something remained guarded. "When I heard someone bought that horse, I had to see for myself," he said, gesturing toward Phoenix. "He's special, you know, more than Harland ever realized." But he's also damaged. Ethan stepped in front of Phoenix protectively. He's recovering now. Carter raised his hands in mock surrender. Easy, kid, I'm not here to take him. As Carter explained, a clearer picture of Phoenix's past emerged. The stallion had been bred for endurance races, pushed to his limits in grueling training sessions. Harland had seen potential but ignored the signs of physical and emotional strain. When Phoenix broke down, Harland tossed him aside. He didn't care about the damage he'd done, Carter admitted, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. But I saw what that horse could be. Ethan's jaw tightened. Carter hesitated, his silence speaking volumes. After a long pause, he spoke again. I wasn't strong enough to stand up to Harland. That's something I have to live with. Ethan didn't respond immediately, his mind racing. Carter's story confirmed what Ethan had suspected. Phoenix wasn't broken by nature but by neglect and cruelty. Ethan finally asked. Carter's eyes met his, steady and sincere. Because you're his second chance. Ethan didn't know whether to trust Carter, but one thing was certain. This man knew things about Phoenix that could be crucial to his recovery. After a moment of silence, Ethan nodded reluctantly. All right, he said, his voice cautious. But if you're going to help, it's on my terms. Carter nodded in agreement. As Carter turned to leave, Ethan glanced back at Phoenix, who stood quietly watching them. The stallion's journey wasn't over, and with this new twist, Ethan realized they were stepping into uncharted territory. Carter returned the next morning with a bag slung over his shoulder and an air of determination. Ethan watched warily as the man approached Phoenix's stall, his movements slow and deliberate. Horses like him need patience, but they also need to be reminded of their strength, Carter said, pulling a bundle of ropes and a lightweight saddle from his bag. We'll start with groundwork, no pressure, no stress. Ethan hesitated but nodded. He wasn't sure he trusted Carter yet, but Phoenix's progress was his only priority. Carter demonstrated a series of exercises using soft commands and fluid movements to guide Phoenix. At first, the stallion's reactions were uncertain, his muscles tense with each step. But Carter's calm, practiced approach seemed to resonate. Ethan watched as Phoenix began to follow Carter's lead, his ears flicking forward, his steps growing steadier. Carter said, glancing at Ethan, he's starting to mirror. Ethan absorbed every detail, determined to learn as much as he could for Phoenix's sake. The days that followed were a delicate balance of trust-building and careful progression. Ethan took over more of the exercises, his bond with Phoenix growing stronger with each session. The stallion began to move with more confidence, his strides longer, his head held higher. For the first time, Ethan saw glimpses of the horse Phoenix was meant to be, but with progress came new challenges. Phoenix still had moments of fear, flashbacks triggered by sudden noises or unfamiliar situations. Ethan's heart ached every time, but he refused to give up. One afternoon, as they worked together in the field, Carter approached Ethan with a thoughtful expression. There's something else you need to know, he said, his voice low. Phoenix wasn't just bred for endurance. He was trained for high-stakes races, and if you want him to truly recover, he needs to face the track again. Ethan's stomach twisted at the idea. The thought of putting Phoenix back in a place that had caused him so much pain felt wrong. I don't know if he's ready, Ethan said, his voice heavy with doubt. Carter placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You'll know when the time is right, but remember, this isn't about the past anymore. Ethan looked back at Phoenix, who stood calmly beside them, his gaze steady and full of quiet strength. The idea of returning to a racetrack felt like a daunting risk, but deep down, Ethan knew Carter was right. Phoenix's journey wasn't just about healing, it was about reclaiming what had been stolen from him. And Ethan was determined to be there every step of the way. The idea of bringing Phoenix to a racetrack lingered in Ethan's mind for days. He wrestled with doubt and fear, questioning whether it was the right decision. Phoenix had come so far, but the memories of his past still clung to him like shadows. Could exposing him to the very environment that had broken him truly help him heal? Ethan spent long nights in the stable, sitting by Phoenix's side, seeking answers in the horse's calm but guarded gaze. "If we do this," he whispered one evening, "it's on your terms." Ethan shared his concerns with Carter, who listened patiently before offering a solution. "There's a private track just outside town," Carter said. "It's quiet, no crowds, no pressure." The thought of a controlled environment eased Ethan's anxiety, and after much deliberation, he agreed. They set a date to bring Phoenix to the track, giving the stallion time to adjust to the idea. Ethan began incorporating small changes in their routine, introducing Phoenix to objects and sounds that mimicked a racetrack without overwhelming him. When the day arrived, Ethan could feel the tension in his chest as he loaded Phoenix into the trailer. The stallion hesitated at first, but with gentle coaxing he stepped inside. The drive was silent, the hum of the engine underscoring Ethan's swirling thoughts. When they arrived, Carter was already waiting, leaning against the fence with a calm, confident expression. "Take it slow," Carter advised as Ethan unloaded Phoenix. Ethan nodded, his hands trembling slightly as he led Phoenix toward the track. At the edge, Phoenix stopped, his ears swiveling as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. His muscles tensed, his eyes darting around as if expecting danger. Ethan stood by his side, murmuring soft reassurances. "You're safe," he said, his voice steady. Slowly, Phoenix took a tentative step forward, then another. Ethan walked beside him, letting the stallion set the pace. The first lap was slow and cautious, but as they continued, Phoenix's steps grew more confident. By the third lap, his gait was steady, his head held high. Watching Phoenix move across the track, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of pride and relief. The stallion wasn't just walking, he was reclaiming his power one step at a time. As they completed the final lap, Ethan stopped and turned to Phoenix, running a hand along his neck. "You did it," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. But as Ethan led Phoenix off the track, Carter approached with a serious expression. "This was just the first step," he said. Ethan knew what he meant. Phoenix needed to confront a real racetrack with its chaos, noise, and energy. The thought filled Ethan with dread, but he couldn't deny that Phoenix had grown stronger, both physically and emotionally. The stallion was no longer the defeated animal Ethan had first seen at the auction. Yet, as much as Phoenix had changed, Ethan knew this next step could either cement their progress or unravel everything they'd worked for. Ethan and Carter spent the following days preparing Phoenix for what was to come. They recreated the atmosphere of a crowded track as best they could, playing recordings of cheering crowds and introducing Phoenix to unfamiliar equipment. Phoenix reacted with unease at first, his old fears bubbling to the surface, but Ethan's patience never wavered. Each day, the stallion grew more accustomed to the new stimuli, his trust in Ethan anchoring him. Still, there was a part of Ethan that questioned whether he was pushing too far, too fast. When the day of the test came, Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The real racetrack was a stark contrast to the quiet one they had practiced on. The stands were empty, but the vastness of the space and the echo of distant sounds were enough to make Phoenix hesitate. As they approached, Ethan placed a reassuring hand on the stallion's neck. "It's just us," he said softly. With a deep breath, he led Phoenix toward the starting gate. Carter watched from the sidelines, his arms crossed, expression unreadable. As Ethan and Phoenix entered the track, a staff member released a starting bell. The sharp clang startled Phoenix, and for a moment, Ethan feared the worst. The stallion reared slightly, his eyes wide with panic, but Ethan stayed calm, his voice steady. "You're okay," he said, gripping the lead rope with care. Slowly, Phoenix's breathing steadied and his hooves returned to the ground. Ethan gave him space, letting him acclimate before asking for anything more. Minutes later, Phoenix took his first cautious step onto the track, then another. Ethan walked beside him, matching his pace. By the time they reached the halfway point, Phoenix's movements were more fluid. His ears pricked forward with curiosity rather than fear. When they completed a full lap, Ethan stopped, letting the stallion stand still and take it all in. Phoenix's chest heaved, his muscles glistening under the sunlight, but there was a calmness in his demeanor that Ethan hadn't seen before. As they exited the track, Carter approached, a rare smile breaking across his face. "You've done it," he said, but Ethan knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something greater. The weeks following Phoenix's triumph at the racetrack were transformative. Word spread quickly through the town and beyond about the horse that had defied the odds. People who had once scoffed at Ethan's efforts now spoke of Phoenix with admiration, calling him a symbol of resilience. But for Ethan, it was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about giving Phoenix the life he deserved, one built on trust, patience, and second chances. As he stood outside the stable one crisp morning, watching Phoenix graze peacefully in the pasture, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Carter, who had become a constant presence in their journey, approached with a thoughtful expression. "You've done more than I thought possible," he said, leaning on the fence. Ethan turned to look at the stallion, his gaze steady. "I don't think it's about what's next for me," he replied. "It's about what Phoenix wants." Carter nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. Ethan began to notice subtle changes in Phoenix. The stallion moved with a confidence that had once seemed impossible. His eyes, once clouded with fear, now held a quiet strength. Phoenix had found his stride not just physically, but emotionally, and it was a transformation that inspired everyone who witnessed it. Claire, the veterinarian, visited one afternoon and couldn't hide her amazement. "He's incredible," she said, running a hand along Phoenix's neck. "You've given him more than a second chance." Ethan realized that Phoenix's journey wasn't just his own. It had become a story that resonated with others. Schools invited Ethan to speak about resilience and compassion, and the local community organized events to celebrate Phoenix's recovery. At one of these events, a young boy approached Ethan, his eyes wide with wonder. "Is it true?" the boy asked, pointing to Phoenix. Ethan smiled, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. "He wasn't broken," Ethan said gently. As the sun set on the pasture that evening, Ethan stood beside Phoenix, their silhouettes framed by the golden light. The bond between them was unshakable, forged through challenges, heartbreak, and triumph. Ethan knew that Phoenix's story was more than just a tale of recovery. It was a testament to the power of trust and the resilience of the spirit. Phoenix snorted softly, nudging Ethan's shoulder in response. Together, they walked back toward the stable, ready to face whatever the future held side by side. If this story of hope and transformation resonated with you, please show your support. Give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of courage and second chances. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter wide. It's about what Phoenix wants. He's earned the right to choose his path now. Carter nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Whatever that is, you'll make sure he's ready." Ethan began to notice subtle changes in Phoenix. The stallion moved with a confidence that had once seemed impossible. His eyes, once clouded with fear, now held a quiet strength. Phoenix had found his stride not just physically, but emotionally, and it was a transformation that inspired everyone who witnessed it. Claire, the veterinarian, visited one afternoon and couldn't hide her amazement. "He's incredible," she said, running a hand along Phoenix's neck. "You've given him more than a second chance. You've given him his spirit back." Ethan realized that Phoenix's journey wasn't just his own. It had become a story that resonated with others. Schools invited Ethan to speak about resilience and compassion, and the local community organized events to celebrate Phoenix's recovery. At one of these events, a young boy approached Ethan, his eyes wide with wonder. "Is it true he used to be broken?" the boy asked, pointing to Phoenix. Ethan smiled, kneeling to meet the boy's gaze. He wasn't broken, Ethan said gently. He just needed someone to believe in him. As the sun set on the pasture that evening, Ethan stood beside Phoenix, their silhouettes framed by the golden light. The bond between them was unshakable, forged through challenges, heartbreak, and triumph. Ethan knew that Phoenix's story was more than just a tale of recovery. It was a testament to the power of trust and the resilience of the spirit. With one last glance at the horizon, Ethan murmured, "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Phoenix snorted softly, nudging Ethan's shoulder in response. Together, they walked back toward the stable, ready to face whatever the future held side by side. If this story of hope and transformation resonated with you, please show your support. Give this video a like, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe for more tales of courage and second chances. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter.